When I was 7 or 8 years old, I was at my grandmother's house for Christmas and was playing hide and seek with some of my cousins. For context, the house was big, worn-down Victorian house that had been moved from its original location to the plot of land my grandmother owned. It was very cold and drafty, especially in certain rooms. The upstairs where we were playing consisted of 4 bedrooms, 3 of which opened to a large landing, one of which was down a longish hall. Most of us, along with our immediate families, were staying the night, but for some reason no one ever stayed in that 4th room. As a child I always thought it was my grandfather's room. He'd died about 10 years prior to my birth, but in hindsight I'm not sure why. As far as I know that wasn't true, and certainly no one ever told me it was. Anyway, it was around 8 p.m. and my turn to count, and of course the person counting went into the separate room to do so. I sat on the bed, closed my eyes and counted to 20. When I opened my eyes it was light out. Morning. I'd closed my eyes at night, counted to 20, and somehow 12 hours had passed. Of course, the immediate thought is that maybe I just fell asleep. I'll refute that with 3 points. First, why didn't my cousins come get me when I failed to seek them? Second, it was cold in that house. We would sleep multiple people to a bed under several blankets, at least one of which was usually electric. I can't imagine sleeping through the night in that kind of cold without some kid of covering. And third, there's no way my parents wouldn't have bothered to come find me before they went sleep, and when they did find me, they wouldn't have left me there, especially without a blanket. I can't tell you what happened. Maybe I had some sort of strange memory lapse that just happened to begin and end in the same location. Maybe the simulation lagged. Maybe I really did skip 12 hours. All I can say for sure is that something happened that night, and I've never been able to explain it. My grandmother's house was a place of many mysteries. It was an old Victorian mansion, the kind you see in horror movies, with tall, narrow windows and a wraparound porch that creaked with every step. The house had been moved from its original location to the plot of land my grandmother owned, which only added to its eerie charm. The walls were adorned with faded wallpaper, and the floors were made of dark, worn-out wood that groaned underfoot. The house was always cold, especially in certain rooms, and the drafts would send shivers down your spine. The upstairs was particularly intriguing. It consisted of 4 bedrooms, 3 of which opened to a large landing. The 4th room was down a long, narrow hall, and it was always shrouded in a sense of mystery. No one ever stayed in that room, and as a child, I always thought it was my grandfather's room. He had died about 10 years before I was born, and I had never met him, but the room held a certain aura that made me believe it was his. It was Christmas, and the house was filled with the warmth of family and the scent of freshly baked cookies. My cousins and I were playing hide and seek, a game we loved to play in the sprawling house. It was around 8 p.m., and it was my turn to count. The rules were simple. The person counting had to go into the separate room and count to 20 while the others hid. I walked down the long hall to the 4th room, feeling a slight chill as I entered. The room was dimly lit, and the air was thick with dust. I sat on the bed, closed my eyes, and began to count. 1, 2, 3. I counted slowly, trying to give my cousins enough time to hide. When I reached 20, I opened my eyes, expecting to see the dark room illuminated only by the faint moonlight streaming through the window. But what I saw was something entirely different. It was light out. Morning. I'd closed my eyes at night, counted to 20, and somehow 12 hours had passed. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I must be dreaming, but the room was still bathed in the soft light of dawn. I looked around, confused and disoriented. How could this have happened? The immediate thought that crossed my mind was that I must have fallen asleep. But there were several things that didn't add up. First, why didn't my cousins come get me when I failed to seek them? They would have noticed my absence and come looking for me. Second, it was cold in that house. We would sleep multiple people to a bed under several blankets, at least one of which was usually electric. I can't imagine sleeping through the night in that kind of cold without some kind of covering. And third, there's no way my parents wouldn't have bothered to come find me before they went to sleep, and when they did find me, they wouldn't have left me there, especially without a blanket. I got up from the bed, my heart pounding in my chest. I walked out of the room and down the hall, my footsteps echoing in the silent house. I made my way to the large landing, where the other 3 bedrooms were located. I knocked on the door of the room where my cousins were staying, but there was no answer. I opened the door and peeked inside, but the room was empty. I checked the other 2 rooms, but they were empty as well. Where was everyone? I made my way downstairs, my mind racing with questions. The house was quiet, too quiet. I called out for my parents, my voice echoing through the empty halls. But there was no response. I spent the next few hours searching the house, but I found no sign of my family. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. I checked every room, every closet, every nook and cranny, but there was no trace of them. I even went outside and searched the grounds, but the only thing I found was the cold, biting wind. As the day wore on, I began to feel a sense of dread wash over me. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. I sat down on the porch, hugging my knees to my chest, and tried to make sense of what had happened. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't come up with a logical explanation. Just as I was about to give up hope, I heard the sound of a car pulling up the driveway. I jumped to my feet and ran to the front door, my heart pounding with excitement. It was my parents, and they were back from wherever they had been. I threw open the door and ran to them, tears streaming down my face. "Where were you?" I cried, throwing my arms around my mother. "I've been looking for you all day." My mother looked at me, confusion written all over her face. "What do you mean, sweetie? We've been here all day. We woke up this morning and found you sleeping in the 4th room. We thought you must have fallen asleep while playing hide and seek." I stared at her, dumbfounded. But I counted to 20 and opened my eyes, and it was morning. "I've been looking for you all day." My father put a hand on my shoulder. "It's okay, son. You must have fallen asleep and had a bad dream. Come inside, and we'll get you something to eat." I followed them inside, my mind still reeling with questions. How could they have been here all day? How could I have slept through the night without a blanket? And why didn't my cousins come get me when I failed to seek them? Over the next few days, I tried to piece together what had happened that night. I talked to my cousins, but they didn't remember anything unusual. They said they had hidden and waited for me to find them, but when I didn't come, they assumed I had fallen asleep and went to bed. I talked to my parents, but they didn't have any answers either. They said they had gone to bed and found me sleeping in the 4th room the next morning. They thought I must have fallen asleep while playing hide and seek and didn't think anything of it. I even talked to my grandmother, but she didn't have any answers either. She said the 4th room had always been a bit of a mystery, and she didn't know why no one ever stayed in it. She said it was just one of those things that couldn't be explained. As I grew older, I began to research the history of the house in the 4th room. I discovered that the house had been built in the late 1800s and had been owned by several different families over the years. The 4th room had been used as a nursery, a study, and even a sewing room at various times. But there was one thing that all the owners had in common: they never stayed in the 4th room. I dug deeper and found that the room had a dark past. According to local legend, a young girl had died in the room in the early 1900s. She had been playing hide and seek with her siblings and had hidden in the room. But when her siblings came to find her, they discovered that she had died in her sleep. The cause of death was never determined, and the room was said to be haunted by her spirit. As I continued to research the history of the room, I began to experience strange things. I would wake up in the middle of the night and hear footsteps in the hall outside the 4th room. I would see shadows moving in the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. I even saw the figure of a young girl standing in the doorway of the 4th room, but when I blinked, she was gone. I tried to rationalize what I was experiencing, but I couldn't come up with a logical explanation. I began to wonder if the room was truly haunted, and if the spirit of the young girl was trying to communicate with me. One night, I decided to hold a séance in the 4th room. I invited my cousins and a few friends, and we gathered in the room, holding hands and calling out to the spirit of the young girl. At first, nothing happened. But then, we began to feel a cold breeze blowing through the room, and the air grew thick with an eerie presence. We asked the spirit to give us a sign, and suddenly, the door to the room slammed shut. We jumped, startled, and looked at each other in disbelief. We asked the spirit to give us another sign, and the lights in the room began to flicker on and off. We continued to communicate with the spirit, asking her questions and receiving answers through the flickering of the lights. We discovered that her name was Emily, and she had died in the room in 1903. She told us that she was lonely and wanted someone to play with her. As the seance came to an end, we thanked Emily for communicating with us and told her that we would come back to visit her. We left the room, feeling a sense of awe and wonder at what we had experienced. But as we made our way down the hall, we heard a soft voice calling out to us. We turned to look and saw the figure of a young girl standing in the doorway of the fourth room. It was Emily, and she was smiling at us. We stood there, frozen in place, as Emily walked towards us. She reached out her hand, and we took it, feeling a sense of peace and calm wash over us. We followed her back into the fourth room, and she showed us a hidden compartment in the wall. Inside the compartment was a small wooden box, and inside the box was a locket with a picture of Emily and her family. We thanked Emily for showing us the locket and promised to keep it safe. We left the room, feeling a sense of closure and understanding. We had solved the mystery of the fourth room, and we had made a new friend in the process. Over the years, I continued to visit the fourth room and communicate with Emily. I would bring her flowers and toys, and she would show me hidden treasures and secrets in the room. I even wrote a book about my experiences with Emily and the fourth room, which became a bestseller and inspired others to explore the mysteries of their own homes. But as time went on, I began to realize that my experiences with Emily were more than just a ghostly encounter. They were a reminder of the power of imagination and the importance of keeping the past alive. They were a testament to the enduring spirit of a young girl who had died too soon, and a tribute to the love and friendship that can transcend the boundaries of time and space. To this day, the mystery of the fourth room remains unsolved. I still don't know what happened that night when I counted to 20 and opened my eyes to find that 12 hours had passed. I still don't know why my cousins didn't come get me when I failed to seek them, or why my parents didn't come find me before they went to sleep. But I do know that something happened that night, something that changed me forever. I know that the fourth room holds a special place in my heart, and that the spirit of Emily will always be with me, guiding me and inspiring me to explore the mysteries of the world around me. And so, the mystery of the fourth room continues to captivate and intrigue me, a reminder of the power of imagination and the enduring spirit of a young girl who will never be forgotten. Working the night shift in group homes for the mentally disabled or severely mentally ill was never an easy task. The hours were long, the pay was modest, and the emotional toll could be immense. But for me, it was more than just a job, it was a calling. I had always felt a deep sense of empathy for those who were marginalized and misunderstood, and I believed that my presence could make a difference in their lives. The group home where I worked was an old Victorian-style house, converted to accommodate the residents. It had a certain charm, with its high ceilings and ornate woodwork, but it also had an air of melancholy that seemed to permeate every corner. The residents were a diverse group, each with their unique challenges and stories. Some were quiet and introspective, while others were more vocal and expressive. But they all shared a common thread of vulnerability that made them endearing. One of the most peculiar things about the house was the constant scratching coming from the walls. At first, I thought it was just squirrels or maybe rats, but as time went on, I began to doubt that explanation. We set traps, but we never caught anything. The scratching would start suddenly and stop just as abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. It was unsettling, but it wasn't what made me a believer in the supernatural. It was a typical night, or so I thought. The residents had all fallen asleep, and I was watching TV in the living room, trying to stay awake. The house was quiet, except for the occasional creak or groan that old houses make. Around 3 a.m., the doorbell started ringing frantically, as if someone was desperately trying to get in. I jumped up from the couch and rushed to the door. As I opened it, I expected to see one of the residents or maybe a late-night visitor. But there was no one there. The front door had a large window, taking up more than 2/3 of its surface, so I could see the entire walkway leading up to the door. The walkway was a long corridor, about 20 to 30 feet, with 12-foot brick walls on either side. There was no way someone could have rung the doorbell and run away without me seeing them. I figured it was a prank, maybe one of the more mischievous residents trying to scare me. So, I went to check on them. I walked down the hallway, opening each door quietly to make sure they were all asleep. They were, and as I closed the last door, the doorbell started ringing again. This time, I was determined to catch the prankster. I turned off all the lights except for the TV and hid beside the door. I waited for what felt like an eternity, my heart pounding in my chest. After about 20 minutes, the doorbell started ringing again, even more frantically than before. I jumped out from my hiding spot and turned on the walkway lights. I looked out the window, but there was no one there. I opened the door, thinking maybe they were hiding to the side, but there was still no one. My stomach dropped, and a feeling of dread washed over me. I slowly started closing the door, and as soon as it was almost shut, the doorbell started ringing again, this time staying that way for at least 15 minutes before finally stopping. It was as if whatever it was took great pleasure in mocking and taunting me. I locked the door and ran back to the couch, turning on every light I could. The house felt different now, charged with an energy that was both unsettling and oppressive. As the nights went on, the doorbell incidents became more frequent. It seemed to read my mind, ringing every time I thought about going outside for a smoke or taking a break. It was as if it didn't want me to forget it was there, a constant threat lurking in the shadows. I started to research the history of the house, looking for any clues that might explain what was happening. I found out that the house had a long history of tragedy and suffering. Many of the residents had experienced severe trauma, and the house itself seemed to absorb their pain. One resident, in particular, stood out. He had gone insane after witnessing his parents' murder. He would often wake up in the middle of the night, screaming and thrashing, as if reliving the horror. Another resident was a medium low-functioning schizophrenic who claimed to hear at least 8 distinct voices in his head. Both of these residents would often have things knocked off their shelves or walls in the middle of the night, and they would yell at people who weren't there. At first, I thought it was just their mental illness, but now I wasn't so sure. The more I thought about it, the more I believed that there was something more sinister at play. I started to think that maybe it was a poltergeist, a malevolent spirit feeding off the negative energy of the house. Years later, I found myself working in a different facility, a place where the air was thick with despair. This facility had a dark history, a place where someone had hung themselves in the bathroom. The bathroom door would slam shut in the middle of the night, no matter how hard we tried to prop it open. It was company policy to keep the door open, but it seemed like an impossible task. The residents in this facility were even more troubled than the ones in the previous home. They would often wake up in the middle of the night, screaming and crying, as if tormented by unseen forces. The staff would try to comfort them, but it was a futile effort. The residents seemed to be trapped in a never-ending cycle of pain and suffering. One night, as I was making my rounds, I heard a faint whisper coming from the bathroom. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest, before pushing the door open. The bathroom was dark, the only light coming from the dim glow of the nightlight. I could feel a presence in the room, a cold, malevolent energy that seemed to wrap around me like a shroud. I quickly turned on the light, and as I did, I saw a figure hanging from the ceiling, its eyes wide with terror. I stumbled back, my heart racing, as the figure disappeared into thin air. I rushed out of the bathroom, slamming the door shut behind me. After that night, I knew I needed help. I couldn't keep living in fear, and I couldn't keep watching the residents suffer. I decided to seek out a medium, someone who could communicate with the spirits and help us find some peace. The medium was an older woman, with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor. She listened to my story, her expression growing more serious with each word. She agreed to come to the facility and see if she could help. The night she arrived, the air was thick with tension. The residents were restless, and the staff was on edge. The medium walked through the facility, her eyes closed, as if she was listening to something only she could hear. She stopped in front of the bathroom, her expression grave. "There is a great deal of pain here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A spirit is trapped, unable to find peace. It feeds off the suffering of the residents, growing stronger with each passing day." She entered the bathroom, her hands outstretched, as if she was feeling her way through the darkness. She stood in the center of the room, her eyes closed, and began to chant softly. The air seemed to grow colder, and I could feel a presence in the room, a malevolent energy that seemed to be fighting against the medium. After what felt like an eternity, the medium opened her eyes and looked at me. "It's done," she said, her voice weary. "The spirit has been released. It will no longer torment the residents." In the days that followed, the facility seemed to change. The air was lighter, and the residents seemed more at peace. The bathroom door no longer slammed shut in the middle of the night, and the residents no longer woke up screaming. I continued to work the night shift, but the fear that had once gripped me was gone. I knew that the spirits were still there, but they were no longer a threat. They were at peace, and so was I. As I looked back on my experiences, I realized that I had been changed by them. I had seen things that I could never unsee, and I had felt things that I could never forget. But I had also learned that there was more to the world than what we could see and touch. There were forces at work that we could not understand, and sometimes, those forces could be dark and malevolent. But I had also learned that there was hope, that even in the darkest of places, there was a chance for redemption. And that was something that I would carry with me, always. Years passed, and I found myself working in a new facility, a place that was filled with light and hope. The residents here were different, their spirits unbroken by the trials of life. They laughed and played, and their joy was infectious. I still worked the night shift, but it was a different kind of night shift. The air was filled with the sound of laughter, and the residents would often stay up late, talking and sharing stories. I would sit with them, listening to their tales, and I would feel a sense of peace that I had never known before. One night, as I was making my rounds, I heard a soft knock on the door. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest, before opening it. Standing on the other side was a young girl, her eyes wide with fear. "Can you help me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my heart going out to her. I knew that she was troubled, that she had seen things that no child should ever see. But I also knew that there was hope, that even in the darkest of places, there was a chance for redemption. And so, I took her hand, and together, we walked into the light. When she was 7 or 8 months pregnant with me, she would accompany my biological father to the local stage theater where he acted in various productions for rehearsals. One job she had taken on her own, even months or years before she became pregnant, was to sit in various places in the house and take notes. She would sit in a few seats on different sides of main level, including on the left side, right side, center, the row right behind the orchestra pit, and even in the very back row. She would go up into the balcony and sit in a few seats up there, and in some of the box seats on either side of the theater. She sat in these areas, noting how the sets looked and how the actors looked on their marks from her angle. She would note if the orchestra sounded too loud you couldn't hear the actors singing, for musicals like The Music Man or Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, or were too quiet. She would pass these notes on to the director, producer, and other people who would need them. The set designer would get notes like tree blocking view of Charlie Brown on stage left. The orchestra conductor would have gotten a note like clarinets too loud for Wedding March/Sunrise, Sunset. From Fiddler on the Roof. One particular night as rehearsal was starting to wrap up, my mom, being muy ancient with me, got up from her seat. As her feet were now hidden by her belly, it was difficult to see where she was walking, even more so since the lights in the house hadn't come up yet. Heading down a flight of stairs, she took a misstep, and almost fell over, when she felt somebody take a strong, firm grip on her upper arm and pulled her back. She felt that same grip suddenly pull her forward but very gently, and it never released until she got to the landing near the exit. She turned to thank the person who helped her down, but there was nobody there. The incident left my mother shaken but grateful. She couldn't shake off the feeling of the firm grip on her arm, the gentle guidance down the stairs, and the airy absence of anyone around her. She decided to keep the incident to herself, attributing it to pregnancy hormones and fatigue. However, the theater had other plans. The next day, as she returned to the theater for another rehearsal, she noticed a strange atmosphere. The actors seemed more subdued, and the director, usually a jovial man, was quiet and introspective. She approached him, asking if everything was all right. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of concern and curiosity. "Did you feel anything unusual last night?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. My mother hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The director sighed, running a hand through his hair. "There have been incidents. Strange occurrences. Things moving on their own, lights flickering, and sometimes, people feel like they're being watched or even touched." My mother's heart raced. She thought about the firm grip on her arm, the gentle guidance. I did feel something," she admitted, her voice barely audible. The director nodded, his expression grave. "I thought so. It's been happening more frequently lately. Some of the crew are starting to get spooked. My mother felt a chill run down her spine. She looked around the theater, the once familiar space now feeling foreign and unsettling. She decided to keep her experience to herself, not wanting to add to the growing unease. As the days turned into weeks, my mother couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. She started noticing small things: a prop moving slightly when no one was around, a cold draft in a corner of the theater where there shouldn't be any, and the occasional whisper when the theater was supposed to be empty. She decided to do some digging. The theater had a long history, and she was determined to find out if there was more to the strange occurrences than just coincidence. She spent hours in the local library, poring over old newspapers and archives, looking for any mention of the theater. What she found was chilling. The theater had a dark past, one that was rarely spoken about. It had been built in the early 1900s and had seen its share of tragedies. There were reports of accidents, unexplained deaths, and even rumors of a curse. One particular story caught her attention: the tale of a young actress who had died during a performance. The actress, known for her beauty and talent, had been performing in a leading role when she suddenly collapsed on stage. The cause of her death was never determined, and her ghost was said to haunt the theater, helping those in need and protecting the performers. My mother felt a shiver run down her spine. Could the ghost of the young actress be the one who had helped her that night? She decided to find out more. One evening, after a particularly long rehearsal, my mother found herself alone in the theater. The rest of the crew had left, and she was gathering her notes when she felt a cold draft. She looked up, her heart pounding, and saw a figure standing at the edge of the stage. It was a woman, dressed in a flowing gown, her hair cascading down her shoulders. She looked at my mother, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and determination. My mother felt a chill run down her spine, but she couldn't look away. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The figure didn't respond, but she seemed to nod, as if acknowledging my mother's presence. My mother felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. She knew, without a doubt, that this was the ghost of the young actress. "Thank you," my mother said, her voice steady. "Thank you for helping me that night." The figure smiled, a soft, sad smile, and then she was gone, disappearing into the shadows. My mother stood there for a moment, her heart pounding, before gathering her notes and leaving the theater. As the days turned into weeks, my mother continued to feel the presence of the ghostly actress. She would often find herself alone in the theater, feeling the cold draft and seeing the figure standing at the edge of the stage. She started to look forward to these encounters, feeling a strange sense of comfort in the presence of the ghost. One day, as she was sitting in the balcony, taking notes, she felt a gentle touch on her shoulder. She turned around, expecting to see the ghost, but instead, she saw an old, faded photograph lying on the seat next to her. It was a picture of the young actress, her eyes filled with the same mix of sadness and determination that my mother had seen in the ghost. My mother picked up the photograph, her heart pounding. She knew, without a doubt, that this was a message from the ghost. She decided to find out more about the actress, determined to uncover the truth behind her death. She spent hours in the library, poring over old newspapers and archives, looking for any mention of the actress. What she found was chilling. The actress had been involved in a love triangle, her affections torn between two men, one a fellow actor, the other a wealthy patron of the theater. The night of her death, she had been performing in a leading role, her heart heavy with the weight of her decision. She had chosen the wealthy patron, breaking the heart of the fellow actor. In a fit of jealousy, the actor had tampered with the props, causing the actress to collapse on stage. My mother felt a shiver run down her spine. She knew, without a doubt, that the ghost of the young actress was seeking justice, her spirit unable to rest until the truth was revealed. My mother decided to take matters into her own hands. She approached the director, telling him about her findings and the ghostly encounters. He listened, his expression grave, and then he nodded, his eyes filled with a mix of sadness and determination. "We need to reveal the truth," he said, his voice steady. "The actress deserves justice." Together, they started to investigate, gathering evidence and talking to the older members of the crew who had been around during the time of the actress's death. They found out that the fellow actor, driven by guilt and remorse, had confessed to his crime on his deathbed, his words recorded in a letter that was now in the possession of his family. my mother and the director approached the family, explaining the situation and asking for their help. They agreed, handing over the letter and expressing their regret for the actions of their relative. With the letter in hand, my mother and the director approached the local authorities, revealing the truth behind the actress's death. The case was reopened, and the fellow actor was posthumously charged with manslaughter, his name forever tarnished by his actions. As the truth was revealed, my mother felt a sense of peace wash over her. She knew, without a doubt, that the ghost of the young actress was finally at rest, her spirit no longer haunting the theater. One evening, as she was sitting in the balcony, taking notes, she felt a gentle touch on her shoulder. She turned around, expecting to see the ghost, but instead, she saw an old, faded photograph lying on the seat next to her. It was a picture of the young actress, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and determination. My mother picked up the photograph, her heart pounding. She knew, without a doubt, that this was a message from the ghost, a final farewell. She smiled, a soft, sad smile, and then she placed the photograph in her bag, a reminder of the ghostly encounter that had changed her life. As the days turned into weeks, my mother continued to work at the theater, her notes helping to improve the productions and her presence bringing a sense of comfort to the crew. She never forgot the ghost of the young actress, her spirit forever etched in her memory. And so, the theater continued to thrive, its dark past forever changed by the truth that had been revealed, the ghost of the young actress finally at rest, her spirit no longer haunting the halls. Years later, as I sat in the same theater, watching a performance, I couldn't help but think about the ghostly encounter that had changed my mother's life. I looked around the theater, the once familiar space now feeling foreign and unsettling. I wondered if the ghost of the young actress was still there, her spirit forever etched in the walls. As the performance ended, I felt a gentle touch on my shoulder. I turned around, expecting to see my mother, but instead, I saw an old, faded photograph lying on the seat next to me. It was a picture of the young actress, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and determination. I picked up the photograph, my heart pounding. I knew, without a doubt, that this was a message from the ghost, a final farewell. I smiled, a soft, sad smile, and then I placed the photograph in my bag, a reminder of the ghostly encounter that had changed my life. And so, the theater continued to thrive, its dark past forever changed by the truth that had been revealed, the ghost of the young actress finally at rest, her spirit no longer haunting the halls. In 2012, my grandmother suffered a major stroke, which led to her being placed in hospice care at home. Surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, friends and family could come by freely to spend time with her. I was very close to my grandma and was fortunate to share much of this time with her. For anyone who has ever been through hospice with a loved one, you will understand how hard this type of thing can be. One night, I was sitting at home in my office, catching up on some work, when all of a sudden, the room filled with the scent of perfume. I'm not talking about a faint smell, I'm saying it was very distinctive and strong throughout the entire room. I stopped everything I was doing and said out loud, to myself, "Something is wrong, that is Graham." I had not spoken to my family that day, but I felt an urgent need to send a text message to my uncle, who was staying with her, to ask, "You guys okay?" This was at 11:20 p.m. I got a response right away saying, "Might want to come say goodbye." "Not okay." I quickly rushed over. Upon arrival, the living room where my family was congregated was very silent, filled with blank faces. Without saying anything, I walked straight to my grandmother and kissed her on the forehead, saying I love her. She was still warm, but no longer breathing. I told my uncle that I was there because Grandma had brought me there. I asked when she passed, and he replied, saying 5 minutes before I sent my text. This puts the perfume in my office at nearly the exact same moment. Now, I'm going to say that I was born into an Irish Catholic family, but I am in no way a religious person. I would have been the first person to discount this type of story if you told it to me. But, I must say, this experience had me thinking that there really is something more out there. I felt it. The days that followed my grandmother's passing were a blur of emotions and responsibilities. The funeral arrangements, the constant stream of visitors, and the overwhelming sense of loss made it hard to focus on anything else. Yet, amidst the chaos, I couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary had happened that night. The scent of her perfume lingered in my mind, a tangible reminder of her presence. My family noticed a change in me. I was quieter, more introspective. They attributed it to grief, and in part, they were right. But there was more to it. I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew about life and death. I started reading books on near-death experiences, spirituality, and the afterlife. I talked to people who had similar experiences, seeking validation for what I had felt. One evening, a week after the funeral, I was sitting in my office again. The room was quiet, the only sound the hum of the computer. Suddenly, I felt a chill run down my spine. The scent of perfume filled the room once more, stronger than before. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. This time, I didn't question it. I knew it was her. "Grandma?" I whispered, feeling a bit foolish but also strangely comforted. The scent lingered for a moment before fading away. I sat there, stunned, trying to process what had just happened. It was as if she was trying to tell me something, to reassure me that she was still there, watching over me. The encounter left me with more questions than answers. I decided to delve deeper into the world of the paranormal. I joined online forums, attended local meetings of spiritualists, and even visited a medium. Each step brought me closer to understanding, but also deeper into a world I never thought I'd explore. The medium, a kind woman named Maria, lived in a small house on the outskirts of town. Her home was filled with crystals, incense, and an aura of calm that seemed to permeate every room. She greeted me warmly and led me to a small room where we sat across from each other. "Tell me what brought you here," she said softly, her eyes gentle and understanding. I recounted the events of the past few weeks, from the night my grandmother passed to the recurring scent of her perfume. Maria listened intently, nodding occasionally. When I finished, she took a deep breath and closed her eyes. "Your grandmother is still with you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She wants you to know that she's at peace, but she also wants you to find your own peace. She's guiding you, helping you see that there's more to life than what we can see and touch." Maria's words resonated with me. They confirmed what I had been feeling, what I had been searching for. I left her house that day with a sense of clarity and purpose. I knew that my journey was far from over, but I was ready to embrace it. My family, however, was not as open to the idea of the paranormal. They were supportive but skeptical. My mother, in particular, was concerned about my newfound interest. She worried that I was getting too caught up in something that could be explained away by science or psychology. "I just don't want you to get hurt," she said one evening as we sat in the living room, the same room where we had gathered the night Grandma passed. "I know how much you loved her, and I know how hard this has been for you. But sometimes, our minds play tricks on us when we're grieving." I understood her concern, but I also knew what I had experienced. I tried to explain it to her, to make her see that this was more than just grief or imagination. But she remained unconvinced. "I just want you to be careful," she said, her voice filled with worry. "Don't let this consume you." I assured her that I wouldn't, but deep down, I knew that this journey was something I had to see through. It was a part of me now, a part of who I was becoming. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected visitor. It was late in the evening, and I was just about to turn in for the night when there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find an elderly woman standing on the porch. She was dressed in a long coat, her gray hair pulled back into a neat bun. She looked familiar, but I couldn't quite place her. "Can I help you?" I asked, a bit taken aback. "I'm sorry to bother you so late," she said, her voice soft and gentle. "But I think we need to talk." I invited her in, curious and a bit wary. She introduced herself as Edna, a friend of my grandmother's from many years ago. They had grown up together, she explained, but had lost touch over the years. She had heard about my grandmother's passing and wanted to pay her respects. But as we talked, I realized that there was more to her visit. Edna had heard about my experiences, about the scent of perfume and my search for answers. She had come to share her own story, to offer me a glimpse into a world I was just beginning to understand. Edna settled into a chair in the living room, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and determination. She began to tell me about her own experiences with the paranormal, about the signs and messages she had received from loved ones who had passed. "Your grandmother and I were very close when we were young," she said, her voice filled with nostalgia. We shared everything, including our belief in the supernatural. We both had experiences, things we couldn't explain. But as we grew older, we drifted apart. Life got in the way, and we lost touch. She paused, her eyes distant as if lost in memory. But I never forgot her, and I never forgot the things we talked about. When I heard about her passing, I knew I had to come see you. I knew you were going through something similar to what I had experienced. Edna's story was both comforting and unsettling. She talked about the times she had felt the presence of her late husband, about the dreams that seemed too real to be just dreams. She talked about the signs she had received, the little things that let her know he was still with her. I know it's hard to believe, she said, her eyes meeting mine. But sometimes, the things we can't see are the most real. Your grandmother is still with you, just like my husband is still with me. They're guiding us, helping us find our way. Her words resonated with me, confirming what I had been feeling all along. I thanked her for sharing her story, for giving me the validation I had been seeking. The weeks turned into months, and my journey continued. I attended more meetings, read more books, and talked to more people who had experienced the paranormal. Each encounter brought me closer to understanding, closer to accepting that there was more to life than what we could see and touch. I also began to notice other signs, little things that let me know my grandmother was still with me. Sometimes, it was a song on the radio that reminded me of her. Other times, it was a dream that seemed too real to be just a dream. Each sign was a comfort, a reminder that she was still watching over me. My family, while still skeptical, began to accept my journey. They saw the changes in me, the peace that had come over me. They understood that this was something I needed to do, something that was a part of who I was becoming. One night, as I sat in my office, the scent of perfume filled the room once more. This time, it was stronger than ever, almost overpowering. I knew it was her, and I knew she was trying to tell me something. "Grandma," I whispered, my heart pounding in my chest. "What are you trying to tell me?" The scent lingered for a moment before fading away. I sat there, stunned, trying to process what had just happened. It was as if she was trying to tell me that my journey was coming to an end, that I had found the answers I had been seeking. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. I knew that this was the last time I would feel her presence, the last time she would guide me. But I also knew that she would always be with me, watching over me, helping me find my way. The months that followed were a time of reflection and growth. I had come a long way since that night in my office, since the moment I first felt my grandmother's presence. I had learned so much, not just about the paranormal, but about myself. I had found a sense of peace, a sense of purpose. I had come to accept that there was more to life than what we could see and touch, that there was a world beyond our own. And I had come to understand that my grandmother was still with me, still guiding me, still helping me find my way. My journey had been a long one, filled with questions and doubts. But it had also been a journey of discovery, of understanding, of acceptance. And in the end, it had brought me closer to my grandmother, closer to the truth, closer to myself. Years have passed since that night in my office, since the moment I first felt my grandmother's presence. But her legacy lives on, not just in me, but in my family, in the stories we tell, in the memories we share. She was more than just a grandmother, she was a guide, a teacher, a friend. She taught me to believe in the impossible, to seek the truth, to find my own path. And she taught me that love never dies, that it transcends time and space, that it is the one constant in a world of change. Her perfume still lingers in my mind, a tangible reminder of her presence. And though I may never feel her again, I know she is still with me, still guiding me, still helping me find my way. And so, my journey continues, a journey of discovery, of understanding, of acceptance. A journey that began with a scent of perfume and a text message, a journey that has brought me closer to the truth, closer to myself, closer to my grandmother. And in the end, that is all that matters.